Hello there, my name is John and thanks for tuning into my channel. Today's video is going to be part 1 in my Christian Nationalism series, where I talk about the history and implications of Christian nationalism in America and whether or not it's good for society. But first, I just want to remind you guys to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already, just so you don't miss any future content. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into the content of this video. So part 1 in my Christian Nationalism series is going to be about the history of the Pledge of Allegiance. And if you're not familiar with the Pledge of Allegiance, which I'm sure most of my audience is, but basically it goes like this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. So that is how we recite the pledge today, if you are someone who practices that, who recites the pledge. I don't do that anymore for personal reasons, which we'll get into later. But that's how it's said today. That's not always how it was worded from the beginning. But we're gonna explore that, look at that a little bit. But first, let's go back to how the pledge came into existence. So around the year 1892 is when the Pledge of Allegiance first came into existence. This was a few decades after the Civil War, so there was, tensions were high in our country. There was some people were maybe scared that there might be another civil war, that other states might start trying to secede from the Union again and things like that. So America wanted to promote this idea, or the American government wanted to promote this idea of unity and indivisibility and stuff like that amongst Americans, so that there wouldn't be it would be discouraged to try to separate from the United States. So it was basically this idea that we're better together and everything like that. Now, in 1892, Francis Bellamy, who was a Christian socialist and a Baptist minister, he was given this task of writing the Pledge of Allegiance, which was, and another thing I forgot to mention is, during this time also, flag sales were starting to be a thing. People were different companies, flag making industries and things like that were starting to sell a lot of American flags, and they were trying to find ways to get more people to buy more flags and to get schools to buy flags. And so they had this idea of writing a Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and basically they were going to give this idea, or posit this idea to the public schools in America, that they would basically start implementing this Pledge of Allegiance as part of their daily ritual, or maybe not. I don't know if it was a daily ritual at the beginning, but it would be something that would be part of a frequent practice there, or an occasional practice of pledging allegiance to the flag. And this would also be something that would promote public schools to purchase these American flags and everything like that. So anyway, in 1892, Francis Bellamy, the Christian Socialist Baptist minister, he was given this task of writing the Pledge of Allegiance. And how it originally was penned, I think it was, and I'm sorry, I had notes earlier, but then I did something with those. I was going to record this video yesterday, and then I'm kind of just doing this off script right now. But it was something along the lines of, I pledge allegiance to my flag and to the nation for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So there was a few things that in the original pledge that were not in, or there are a few things in today's pledge that were not in the original pledge. Like, particularly, it didn't say to the flag of the United States of America, and it didn't have the words under God. Those were later additions, which we'll get into as well. Now, another interesting thing about the Bellamy Pledge, Francis Bellamy's version of the Pledge of Allegiance, is that it included the Bellamy salute, which, if you look that up, you can look it up. It was actually identical to the Nazi salute, which you've probably seen in some pictures during World War II, or maybe some films about World War II, when Nazis would do their Hail Hitler and things like that, or they'd be kind of saluting the Nazi party or the Nazi government. It was that same fascist symbol, the straightforward arm gesture, holding their arms straight forward, pointing up towards the flag. So that's how they originally pledged allegiance to the flag. They would recite the pledge and they would hold their arms out like that. Obviously, there's reasons why we don't do that anymore today when anyone recites the pledge, which we'll get into that as well. So that brings us to our next development in the Pledge of Allegiance. So during World War II, obviously we're getting some more high tensions in the world, and there was some needs for changes, obviously, with, as we just discussed, with the Bellamy salute being very similar to the Nazi salute, which was becoming a big thing at that time. Well, they decided to change the Nazi salute. Instead of doing that, they did the hand over the heart gesture. So that was implemented in 1942 to separate any kind of association with the Nazi regime, with the Axis during World War II. And then also during that time, immigration was starting to be a bigger thing in America, and there was starting to be people coming from all different countries that were seeking a better life or refuge or things like that. And instead of just using the words "my flag," they decided to implement the flag of the United States of America. I think first they just changed it to the flag of the United States, and then later that year, within a year or two, they changed it to the flag of the United States of America, because we didn't want people moving in from other countries, and they're reciting the Pledge of Allegiance and they're saying "to my flag," but then when they say that, they might mean the flag of my home country, my country of origin, instead of to the American flag. So they wanted everyone pledging allegiance to the American flag and not to the flag of their home country. So again, this idea of Christian nationalism, of like, we're all, uniting around this idea of the United States being this great country that we must support, and that we must support it at all costs, and be willing to put our lives before it, or whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. Make it the ultimate thing that we must honor and be willing to sacrifice our lives for. So yeah, we had those changes. And then during the Cold War, around the year 1954, this is when communism started to take a big rise in the East, like in Russia and China and different things like that, North Korea. And so with all that communist tension rising, and a lot of the communist countries were a little more atheistic, or at least that's how they were painted, how they were seen from the American perspective, the religious American perspective. Well, they decided under Eisenhower's presidency to basically incorporate the words "under God" into the Pledge of Allegiance. So now, in 1954 and onward, that's where it changed to how we recite it now, including the words "the flag of the United States of America" and "under God." And basically the idea behind that was that it would rally people, it would rally our country to make it look like God was on our side, and that all of our enemies are against God, and if God be for us, who can be against us, So that obviously made a lot more people that were maybe culturally Christian, but not really like super devoted Christians. Because obviously, I would say if you're a really devoted Christian, you would see that there's problems with the Pledge of Allegiance. But if you're kind of more of a cultural Christian, a casual Christian, this was a nice, like, this sounded nice, including the words "under God," because now it looks like, oh, I can, support God and country and stuff like that, and we can. But obviously there's problems that that come with that, like separation of church and state, which can be a big issue. We might do a whole episode about the separation of church and state, but we're just talking mainly about the Pledge of Allegiance for now. But kind of like from 1954 going onward, up into the end of the 20th century, going into the 21st century, that's when it kind of became commonplace for the Pledge of Allegiance to be like required in public schools for just part of their daily rituals or weekly rituals or whatever, that they would recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And I don't think we do that as much today. I think that that's kind of starting to go away, but I know it was a big thing. Like when my dad was in public school, I was homeschooled, as I've said before, so we didn't do this. But yeah, one thing that is interesting is that I said earlier in this, or I may have said earlier in this video, I'm not sure. But there was a time in my life where, when I was in fundamentalist Baptist churches, whenever I was a member in those kind of churches, they would often have the pledge recited at like special occasions, like if you had a 4th of July Sunday service or a Memorial Day service, Veterans Day service, things like that, or like recognition of 9/11 or anything like that. A lot of times they would either do the national anthem, standing for the national anthem, and putting your heart in front of your I'm not good at words right now. Putting your hand over your heart and standing in reverence for the flag and for those who've given their lives and things like that for our country. And then reciting the pledge was one of those things too that I've seen in several of these different churches. And like, especially in VBS, like Vacation Bible School, it seemed like it was a thing in almost all of the Vacation Bible School services that I went to, where they would recite the Pledge of Allegiance, then they would recite a pledge to the Christian flag, and then to the Bible, which all of those are just kind of weird in my opinion. I mean, maybe you could say as a Christian there might be a little bit of, I don't know, with the Bible, maybe that's not quite as weird as pledging allegiance to the Christian flag or to the American flag, but all of it's just weird, because even Jesus spoke against like taking oaths and things like that, which is another thing. Like we do that in our court system, like where we put or like when someone's getting sworn into office and they put their right hand on the Bible, like that is another thing that is not really a Christian thing. I mean, it goes against Jesus's very teachings about taking oaths. So, but we can get into that at a later time. Anyway, but yeah, so I was, from about the time I was 19 until approximately 3 years ago or so, 4 years ago, it was about really the end of 2020, beginning of 2021 is when I left that kind of fundamentalist Baptist church environment. So for about at least 10 years or 10, 11 years, I was in that environment where we would kind of recite the pledge and do the national anthem and stuff like that. And at first I thought, okay, I guess this is a good thing. I didn't think too much of it. Obviously, I grew up homeschooled, where we didn't do that thing in school very often, and we weren't like regular church goers. I mean, we went to church on occasion and stuff like that, but most of the churches that we went to, they didn't really recite the pledge in their services. But But yeah, this started becoming a thing, and I'm like, well, I guess if the Christians here are doing this and these seem to be the right kind of Christians, I agreed with their theology, so who am I to question their practices on honoring America or honoring the flag or fallen soldiers and things like that? And I'm not against honoring fallen soldiers, just so you guys know. I'm not against that. Not against honoring service members, but when you make a church service that's supposed to be about uh, honoring Christ and God and things like that, and you make it into this patriotic worship service, that's where things start to get a little bit dicey. And that's actually, I think, where the beginning of me leaving that fundamentalist church environment, this is kind of what started to put some cracks in the armor of that fundamentalist Christian environment for me. That framework is when I saw how much emphasis was put on patriotism and trying to merge the church and the state, and like just have this whole Christian nationalism thing promoted in churches, and like they would just put on these full, like they would decorate a church auditorium in American flags and all this red, white, and blue decorations, and talk about how great our country is and our military and all that stuff. It started to seem like we were just worshiping this military industrial complex and worshiping America rather than worshiping God, who is the reason we go to church. So that started poking holes in the cognitive dissonance that we had in that church environment, and I started to see through the cracks in the armor, and it just started to, once those cracks start happening, once you start getting tears in the wallpaper and then you start pulling the rest of the wallpaper off, then eventually you start to see that almost, not all of it, but a lot of it is just hogwash, and it's just cognitive dissonance, and it's confirmation bias and all this other kind of stuff that's going on. So I'm not going to continue this video too much longer. I have places to be, I have stuff to do, but I just wanted to do this quick video to talk about this. If you enjoyed it, make sure that you like and comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. Give me your feedback, whether you agree with me or disagree, or any interesting things you want to say about any experiences you've had in this kind of environment, or with Christian nationalism or the Pledge of Allegiance. I would like to hear your feedback on that. So anyway, with that being said, I hope you all have a good rest of your day. I'll see you next time, and God bless.